Good morning and welcome to this WIOA webinar, Orientation to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. My name is Scott Shook with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. I'll be the facilitator for today's webinar. As a reminder, all participants on the call are in mute mode. Please if you have questions, please enter those questions in the question box in the webinar menu, and we'll answer those towards the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on Illinois WorkNet within the next 48 hours. With that, I want to turn the session over to Cameron Switman, who will be our presenter for today.
Thank you, Scott. So good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining this WIOA Orientation webinar. My name is Cameron Switman, and I'm a consultant with KEB. We help facilitate the implementation of WIOA activities across the state. This is a basic WIOA orientation for new staff that will introduce aspects of WIOA, including but not limited to the one-stop system and MOU negotiations. So essentially today's webinar has been designed to orient new partner staff, and we'll focus on the very basics of WIOA and how it's implemented in Illinois. So since this webinar is being recorded for future use, as Scott said, we're going to hold off on questions until the end of the presentation. But we'll focus on answering questions in the question pod from those new partner staff joining us today. We'll, of course, have an FAQ document, responding to all questions submitted today as well. I also understand that, this is a lot of information, a lot of new information for some of you, so if you don't have fully formed questions right now during the webinar, feel free to write to that email address there on your screen, and we'll get back to you with the response as soon as we can. And again, this PowerPoint is being recorded and will be available for all those in attendance. Okay, so now to get into today's agenda, we'll first go into what the federal requirements for WIOA are, as laid out in the final rule and other federal guidance in Part 1, and go over the basics of the WIOA one-stop system. Then we get specifically into the governor's guidelines provided to local areas for how to negotiate their MOUs, or Memoranda of Understanding, and how they share costs among required partners. So this is going to get into our favorite topic of infrastructure costs, which we'll explain in Part 2. Then we'll talk about the certification of comprehensive one-stop centers and the regional and local planning guide that governs the regional plans and local plans. We'll touch on that as well, and those take effect July 1st. And then we'll also go over submission guidance for MOUs and regional and local plans and other documents. We'll finish up by talking about the importance of service integration in the WIOA system in Illinois and new activities regarding this principle of WIOA. And then at the end of the orientation, as I mentioned, we'll provide some resources to you and connect you with additional resources as we go along as well. So that's today's agenda. Okay. So now getting into Part 1 of 5, I'd like to take some time exploring the federal legislation and final rules that govern the WIOA system here and direct our state guidance, as well as the basics of the one-stop system too. So the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act was signed into law on July 22nd, 2014. So this law amended and replaced WIA, or the Workforce Investment Act, and also amended the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, Wagner-Peiser, and the Rehabilitation Act as well. So thereby, this essentially brought together in strategic coordination the core programs of federal investment in skill development. So that's kind of context for you. So the four core programs you might recognize: Employment and Training Services for Adults, Dislocated Workers, and Youth, Wagner-Peiser Employment Services, Adult Education Literacy Programs, and Vocational Rehabilitation State Grant. So here are some highlights of how WIOA reformed WIA. Just to go through them briefly, I feel like it will provide a good basis for today's presentation. So WIOA requires states to strategically align workforce development programs, such as through the Unified State Plan, which we'll get into just briefly. WIOA ensures that federal investments in employment and training programs are evidence-based and data-driven. WIOA fosters regional collaboration and integration of services. And WIOA promotes work-based training, business-driven services for job seekers. So there's no need to memorize these right now, but just keep these themes in mind of evidence-based and data-driven, collaboration, integration, alignment. Those are important themes in WIOA and how we implement it in the state. So now we can see here the actual principles of WIOA and delve a little bit further into them. So WIOA principles, WIOA prioritizes collaboration and alignment between employment, education, and training programs. So remember when I said that WIOA focuses on alignment of workforce development programs, alignment, integration, collaboration, data and information sharing, these are the main tenets or principles of WIOA and the plans that implement it. So shrinking those concepts down here into 3 principles, they begin on your screen with program alignment. So we want to see alignment between our workforce and our employers' needs. And then also WIOA's principles include increased accountability and enhanced service delivery of those services we are providing job seekers and employers in Illinois through WIOA. I think it's also important to mention that the law also envisions deep partnerships with nonprofits, community colleges, economic development, and social service agencies as well, and that's something else that we're really focusing on right now too. Okay, now I want to touch up for a couple of slides here on some of the main goals and ideas behind WIOA implementation. So we'll spend a little time reviewing these. It's not specifically important to have all these principles and goals memorized again, but it is important to be able to understand the reasons for these goals and how these themes are being represented in our workforce system. So number 1, increase access to workforce-related services. Creating a more efficient system for receiving career services for all populations of job seekers, regardless of location in the state, is crucial. Better aligning workforce investment, education, and economic development systems. As we read before, through aligning our systems, they can work to one another's benefit for job seekers, each aiming to increase community and economic prosperity. And then also improving reliance of worker skills and credentials, creating a confident workforce that has the skills they need to be able to fill those high-demand careers. Okay, so we have 3 more as well. Serve needs of employers, workers, and job seekers. So meeting the job seekers, employers, and employees where they are to provide them with the tools and skills they need, not using a one-size-fits-all approach. Also, increasing job retention, earnings, and credential attainment to reduce welfare dependency. So through something like on-the-job training, apprenticeships, and other mechanisms, we can make sure people find the jobs they want and the jobs that they can succeed at. And find those high-demand career pathways. And so through achieving these other goals, we can increase prosperity, productivity, economic growth, and even global competitiveness for our workforce, which is the ultimate goal for the workforce system in Illinois, as laid out by the governor and the state's workforce-related planning efforts that we have. Okay, so now that we have explored the principles and goals, what does the actual workforce development system look like in Illinois? So we have 17 required program partners. Of those, 4 are core program partners with additional obligations. I'll get more into who these partners are in a minute, but for now, just know that there are 4 core partners providing WIOA program services, and they are integral to the implementation of WIOA, and they work alongside the required partners in the workforce system in the state. So the core and required partners, they do this by delivering services through a one-stop system. In a one-stop system, there are designated local areas that house at least one comprehensive one-stop center in each one of these local areas, or what we call LOEs, which is an acronym for Local Workforce Innovation Areas, if you want to be technical. And again, there's 22 of these local workforce innovation areas across the state. So services provided by these core required partners, they can be found at these one-stop centers. At all regular business hours. To put it simply, essentially, this is how the main principles and goals of WIOA are implemented or operationalized. So now expanding to a broader, higher level view, how does the WIOA system work in our state? So the ultimate authority within the WIOA system in Illinois lies with the governor. For example, the governor being required to deliver guidance on the WIOA system regularly releases the governor's guidelines for MOU development and negotiations periodically. And then underneath the governor, you have the State Workforce Board, or the IWIB, the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board. They provide strategic leadership and oversight that helps further the state's goals to meet the workforce needs of businesses and workers. And then we also have the interagency leadership team that helps the 7 state agencies collaborate to ensure WIOA regulations and policies can be implemented at the local level. And then at that same level, we have the interagency technical assistance team there in that long blue box. They provide technical assistance to required partners in local areas to operationalize policy and guidance, and they also resolve local implementation issues through direct support and intervention if needed as well. The 4 core program partners that we just reviewed and other required partners within WIOA, they provide services to job seekers throughout the state through the one-stop delivery system again. So if you look at the red, those represent local workforce innovation areas. And again, LWIAs must have one comprehensive one-stop center where anyone can walk in the door and access the full range of WIOA services, either in person or through technology. So this is actually where the services are getting provided. There can also be other designated service sites within a local area, such as designated affiliate sites and designated specialized centers, or other non-designated access sites, which we see throughout WIOA, throughout the one-stop system in Illinois. But in almost all cases, there's only one designated service site or comprehensive one-stop center in a local area, aside from local area 7. Again, and this is the comprehensive one-stop center where you get it's the one-stop shop for WIOA services. Okay, so the operation of these one-stops is led by a one-stop operator. So each one-stop operator is selected through a competitive procurement process. These operators must be active and in place by July 1 of each program year. So it's at this time that the certification of the comprehensive one-stop centers also takes effect. Each center must be certified through a required process each program year as well. We'll touch on this a little bit more later. On this date, though, one other aspect of WIOA takes effect, and these are the regional and local plans and MOUs, which you see underlined there in that third point. So the local plan, I'll just touch on what the regional and local MOUs are briefly, but the local plan serves as a 4-year action plan to develop, align, and integrate the region and local areas' workforce development systems. Just as we see alignment and integration language at the macro level of WIOA, also at the regional and local levels, it is made focus as well. So thinking of it abstractly, the local plan provides the platform to achieve the local area's vision and goals. Whereas, and then we have also the regional plan, which is essentially required to meet the purpose of developing, aligning, and integrating service delivery strategies. And they support the state's vision and goals as well. But they do this by coordinating resources among multiple local areas in a region. So if you look at this map here on the right, you see those red outlines. Those are the economic development regions that house the local workforce innovation areas, where those services are being provided through those comprehensive one-stop centers or other access sites. Okay. So I also want to touch on MOUs as well. So the local MOU, on the other hand, so this serves as the contract between all the core and required partners in the local area concerning how those career services are going to be provided. So this achieves another key goal of WIOA too, and that's establishing integrated, there's that word again, integrated, and effective delivery systems that produce those skilled workers that businesses in the local area and the regions and the regional economies that they demand. So local MOUs, they reflect that shared vision of the local workforce innovation boards, in which there's one board per local area, and they oversee the local one-stop delivery system, essentially, and also require partners to establish and maintain high-quality workforce development systems and centers. I think it's also important to keep in mind that these MOUs are consistent with the visions articulated in WIOA and in the state, regional, and local planning priorities, and in the Unified State Plan as well. So these local MOUs, through their budgets, they also reflect and document how each required partner will contribute its proportionate and agreed upon share of local infrastructure costs too, and local one-stop delivery system costs, which we're going to get into in a minute, but it also serves as that contract as well. Okay, so now let's turn back for a second, though, to who the program partners are who provide career services in the WIOA system. So there are 4 titles in WIOA that form the foundation for the workforce system. So we have Title I, they're administered by Commerce as the primary source of federal workforce development funding to provide career training and employment services to, again, adults, dislocated workers, and youth. And then we have Title II, adult education and family literacy. This is managed by the Illinois Community College Board, or ICCB, and they have a wide network of community colleges, junior colleges, and technical colleges, and other community organizations that provide these services. And then Title III, Wagner Pizer, employment services, administered by IDES, provides reemployment services such as unemployment insurance and labor market information as well. And then we have Title IV, vocational rehabilitation services. They're administered by DHS, Division of Rehabilitation Services. They provide people with disabilities with services and supports that lead to employment. But core partners, they also have additional obligations under the law as well. So the additional obligations include developing a unified state plan, which the core partners are currently finishing up for PY2020 for the 2020 Unified State Plan. This plan lays out the 4-year state strategy for the workforce system in the state. It's going to be submitted through a federal portal to DOL and the Department of Education this March, so that's coming up pretty quickly. They also are collectively held accountable, these core partners, for 6 primary indicators of performance. If one of these indicators fails, then they all do. So they're codependent. I won't go into detail here, but these performance indicators, they consist of information and data on participants in subsidized employment or education and training activities at different intervals after receiving services through the WIOA system, maybe such as during the 2nd or 4th quarter after exit from a program, and then also the effectiveness of serving employers as well. It's also an indicator. You can see here that I also have a link to more information on that as well within the slide that you can access. Okay, so WIOA also identifies required partners aside from those core partners. So all of those core partners and these required partners, they must provide access to their programs in every comprehensive one-stop center throughout the state. So responsibilities of these required partners include providing access to program services through local one-stop delivery systems and the centers, making career services available by each program and accessible to adults, dislocated workers at these centers, use of a portion of program funds to maintain one-stop delivery system, and then also contributing a defined share of infrastructure costs of the one-stop center as well. So keep in mind that though these are the main partners, local workforce boards can also include additional partners in the one-stop centers as well to provide career services as they see fit, as long as they contribute to the one-stop system. So WIOA also identifies situational partners as well. This is a little bit more nuanced, so I'm going to take some time to explain this, but program partners that must make services available in comprehensive one-stop centers and share in the cost of maintaining the one-stop delivery system as agreed upon in those MOUs when there is a designated provider of the program services in the local area only. So again, only if these partners are active in the local area are they then required partners. And these are National Farm Workers Job Program, HUD, or Housing and Urban Development, Job Corps, and Youth Build. Again, situational partners, they're not required to be a party to the MOU in each of the 22 local areas, only if they're active there. Okay, so we'll touch on what WIOA's definition of access is later in the orientation again, but for now, know that WIOA requires that partners provide access to program services through the local one-stop delivery systems and the comprehensive one-stop centers. Partners are providing career services, making these services authorized under each program, accessible to WIOA participants at comprehensive one-stop centers as well. So basically, just keep in mind that we are providing access to career services to help job or career seekers launch onto a career pathway. So we'll talk about each one of these other obligations in the next section, so you know the difference between delivery system costs, and infrastructure costs. But other obligations of these one-stop partners include what's on your screen here: negotiating a memorandum of understanding, or MOU, in each local area, use a portion of program funds to maintain the one-stop delivery system, and contribute a defined share of infrastructure costs to operate the comprehensive one-stop center as well. Okay, so we were just introduced to the concepts of access to career services, but what are these career services that we're talking about? So there are 23 career services that must be made available in every center in Illinois, every comprehensive center. You have 11 basic career services. So these are available to anyone who accesses the one-stop. Examples could be eligibility determination, candidate applications, and assessment. You have 11 individualized services tailored to each participant. These are individual employment plans, career planning, ESL services, and then also a follow-up service as appropriate for 12 months, counseling for participants placed into a job, for example. Okay, again, so these career services, they must be made available in every comprehensive one-stop center through real-time, in-person means, by a program staffer or cross-trained staff, or they can also be provided in real time via direct linkage technology, which we'll get into in a moment. But I also want to note for our TANF partners on the webinar today, that TANF must provide individuals the opportunity to initiate an application for TANF assistance at a one-stop center. This has been a point of emphasis for DOL in the past and continues to be moving forward. So now I want to get into who is actually running these one-stop centers, and the answer is the one-stop operators. So one-stop operators, they do as the name suggests, they operate comprehensive one-stop centers. Again, they must be in place by July 1 in accordance with WIOA law, as I mentioned earlier. One-stop operators must be competitively procured every 4 years as well, and their roles must be clearly stated in the request for proposals that go out that local areas use to procure them. So just a couple of facts there on one-stop operators for you. As for the role of the one-stop operator, it's to primarily coordinate service delivery of required one-stop partners and service providers. So the local boards are responsible for setting the exact roles they want in their local areas, though. They have that responsibility. Some examples of their roles would be, again, coordinating service providers across the delivery system, be the primary provider of services within the center, providing some services within the center, and then coordinating service delivery in a multi-center area. So those are just some examples of a role of the one-stop center operator, as laid out in the final rules, as you can see there by the citation. One-stop operators are also prohibited from performing some functions as well that could create a conflict of interest. So those on the screen are those prohibited activities. One, cannot convene system stakeholders in the development of a local plan, cannot be responsible for overseeing itself, a pretty obvious conflict there, cannot manage or significantly participate in the competitive selection of one-stop operators. It's not their role. And also cannot select or terminate one-stop operators for services or youth providers. And then they also aren't allowed to develop a budget for local board activities. All right, so there is the first part of the presentation, again, focusing on the one-stop system and WIOA federal guidance and regulations. So now that we've reviewed that and how it's designed to work, we can explore a little more how it's operationalized in Illinois, as well as how the costs of the system are accounted for and negotiated as well. Okay, so the aforementioned governor's guidelines, they're a big deal because they are required by the law and they provide guidance to local areas about how to negotiate MOUs, which makes the rubber hit the road for how core and required partners provide services in the local area, and how to negotiate cost sharing to operate those comprehensive one-stop centers and ensure delivery of services through each local area. So there are three main purposes to the governor's guidelines, which you see on your screen here. They are to fulfill a WIOA requirement for the governor to issue guidance, as we mentioned, for negotiating cost sharing and service delivery. This is a very important function. Optimizes service quality and value for customers, and core partner return on investment, of course, and then also establishing ground rules for MOU negotiations and also cost sharing. So those are the three main purposes to really keep in mind when it comes to the governor's guidelines. Excuse me. Okay, so now we see some context here. So the guidelines were first issued in December 2015 under the WIOA draft rules, and then supplemental guidance was then disseminated along with 4 other revisions that have been issued since 2015, the latest being Revision 4, which was issued just this past November. And Revision 4 really focused on streamlining and clarifying the MOU template and other guidance. I also want to note that the MOU template for this program year is indeed final and available on WorkNet, which I will provide a link to later in the orientation when I provide links to all the forms and relevant resources and other materials that you might need. Some other changes over time have included updates to cost allocation methodology guidance concerning perhaps FTEs, additional guidance and clarification regarding negotiation of shared costs, and then also updates to the MOU template, clarifying things, making it more streamlined, local service matrices, and then the standard budget spreadsheet as well. So on the screen here, you see this lists all the sections of the guidelines. So you know what they cover and where to find the timeline, the glossary, templates that you're going to need in your work during the MOU negotiations. We'll talk more about infrastructure costs here in a minute, the 2 different funding mechanisms as well, one being a last resort only, that being the state funding mechanism. But we're going to touch on those infrastructure costs and then also the funding mechanisms here in a minute. Okay. So I just want to briefly touch on some of the forms and other important documents included within the governor's guidelines. So first, we have the pre-program year planning form. So this is a form that's submitted by each local area to the State Interagency Technical Assistance Team. It's made up of core partner representatives and then also required partner representatives. And it highlights important local information such as who is fulfilling roles in the local negotiations, proposed timeline for meetings and activities to take place during negotiations, whether there are any waiver requests from any provisions of the governor's guidelines. Then we also come to the MOU template, number 2 there, and one-stop operating budget, where those infrastructure costs I mentioned earlier and other shared costs are described in that budget. So they're also included as appendices to the governor's guidelines. So these are updated and streamlined regularly to account for those changes in federal and state guidance and regulations. The report of outcomes there, number 4, that details the outcomes of the MOU negotiations. That's also included, and that's due on April 15th of each program year. And then a required checklist as well to help us stay in compliance with direct linkage. Number 5 is also included. We're going to discuss direct linkage here in a moment too, and touch more on that concept. And that's all I'm going to get into on this webinar to avoid getting too ahead of ourselves here, too in the weeds. But you can always refer to the governor's guidelines for an accurate listing of those required forms and any other guidance concerning MOU negotiations as well. Okay, so now that you know that the governor's guidelines are an authoritative source on how local areas should negotiate their MOUs, now we can talk about what is actually required in those MOUs. So 1, they serve as a tool to achieve integration. 2, they reflect a shared vision and commitment of local workforce innovation boards. Again, there's one in every local area to oversee the one-stop system. Document each required partner's commitments to service delivery, and then also demonstrate negotiations were in good faith by individuals with authority to commit financial and programmatic resources. But I also do want to note that MOUs have to be negotiated at least every 3 years per the law. Yet partners have to negotiate the MOU budgets every year per the law. So local areas essentially have to append to their MOUs every year the updated budgets for how the partners are going to share in those costs in the local area. So there's a little bit of a nuance there. Okay, so on your screen here, these are the decisions reflected in the MOU. So you can see that this is where the rubber kind of meets the road. There are a lot of commitments that must be made and a lot of areas where disagreement can occur. For example, how is each partner going to provide its services in the local area? At what specific locations will those services be available? What method either in person or via technology is each partner going to use to provide these services? Excuse me. What is its specific role as determined by the local board of one-stop operators? How will coordination between each of the core and required partners be made? And of course, the big kahuna, how will costs be allocated among all the core and required partners this next program year? So those are some of the questions and some of the concepts that are being explored in MOUs, just to give you a flavor of what's contained in them. So when we're talking about how each partner will make its services available in the local area, the definition of access, as we mentioned earlier in the law, is very important. So there are three ways core and required partners can provide these services. Number one, they can have staff physically present. Number two, cross-training another partner staff to provide your program services. Or number three, provide your services through a direct linkage technology, which has very specific requirements in the law and even more stringent requirements in Illinois per our governor's guidelines. So these are the direct linkage technology requirements in the final rule. A direct linkage through program staff or technology must be made available if needed by the customer. Two, program staff can arrange to meet with the customer at a later date and time, but must be made within a reasonable amount of time. Contact must be made. And then also three, providing a phone number, website, or pamphlet is okay, as long as it's not the only information offered to a customer. Direct linkage via technology to a program staff member must remain available to the customer at all times. And I'll get into a little more of this just so we have a good understanding of what direct linkage is. So this here is a part of Appendix Item I in the governor's guidelines. We go into more detail into direct linkage and provide you that checklist to make sure that direct linkage is being provided in a compliant manner in each local area. So the first requirement covered is what it means to provide a direct connection to services by phone and video. So a direct linkage must either be by phone with a specific dedicated phone number, phone coverage during normal business hours and all business days, and then also there has to be a voicemail capability enabling customers to leave a message if access to services via phone is unavailable at that time of contact. But then also it could be by video. High-speed internet capability is a must though. Dedicated computer-based communication between multiple locations. This could be through Skype or Zoom or some other real-time video connection. And it must be a communication via two-way real-time video and audio transmission as well. And then also backup instructions or appointment scheduling. If access to services via video is unavailable at the time of the contact, that's also a must too for providing direct linkage as well. So general requirements for MOUs. Again, here I'm going to go over the direct linkage requirements. A direct linkage has to be within a reasonable period of time, immediate, on-demand access as the norm. Contact initiated within 24 hours if service via direct linkage was unavailable at the time of initial contact from the customer. And three, a program staff member who can provide information or services to the customer must be the one who's responding. So specifically identify required partner staff, persons who are trained and knowledgeable regarding the required partner services and programs, and for whom providing services via direct linkage technology is a formal part of his or her job. So these are the main requirements of providing direct linkage, which again is when a customer comes into the one-stop center and then is connected directly by phone or by Skype video or some video technology to the program staffer who is off-site. Okay, so now that we've talked about direct linkage, now I want to discuss infrastructure costs and what they are. So infrastructure costs are the non-personnel costs needed to operate a comprehensive one-stop center, put simply. So think leases, utilities, maintenance, assistive technology too, equipment, and even other technology to help participants access services. These are what the infrastructure costs encompass. But there is a difference between these infrastructure costs and then other shared local system costs. Infrastructure costs are specific to operating the comprehensive one-stop center. So you can see examples here on the slide. Facilities costs, leases, technology such as telecom, and then also marketing, which example that would be signage, for example. So shared local system costs, also called local service delivery costs, are different from infrastructure costs. They're the other costs it takes to deliver services throughout the local area. So it can include affiliate sites, satellite campuses, or other locations or ways customers can access services if they're not at the comprehensive one-stop center. So it encompasses every way people who need jobs or businesses, who need skilled workers, access the services available in the local area. So examples on the slide would be intake, needs assessments, local board functions, business services, joint staff training is a popular one, other costs agreed upon by local required partners as well. It's fairly wide open. One-stop operating budgets are, by default, negotiated under the local funding mechanism, as you see here on this slide. Excuse me. So local agreement is always expected through this local funding mechanism. There's also a state funding mechanism as well that is triggered when agreement cannot be reached, and this is very much not the desired outcome that we want of negotiations. There's more flexibility under the local funding mechanism, for example. So this is the default, and local agreement is expected through this local funding mechanism. For example, when partners make contributions to the one-stop center, the law places caps on the amount partners can contribute under that state funding mechanism when partners don't agree. So that limits the amount of money available to fund the one-stop center. There are no caps applied in the local funding mechanism when partners agree how to share costs. So there theoretically could be more money available if the partners come to an agreement. There's also, again, just more flexibility under the local funding mechanism. So here's a brief explanation of the three types of contributions core required partners can make under the local funding mechanism. So we have cash, which is cash or interagency transfer between required partners. And then we also have non-cash, which are those expenditures incurred by a partner on behalf of the one-stop center, and also non-cash goods or services to be used in the center. And then we also have the third party in kind. Examples of this would be space, technology, or other non-personnel services, or other contributions from a non-one-stop partner. So please note that non-cash does not equal in kind. That language does not exist in WIOA. Now we do have third party in kind. For example, when a county donates building space to house a comprehensive one-stop center, that would be an example of the third party in kind contribution. Okay, so I do want to get a little bit more into the state funding mechanism too as the last resort. So again, there's no flexibility under the state funding mechanism. So you can basically read that as the state funding mechanism is just not desirable. It could result in less money to fund the comprehensive one-stop center, and partners have fewer options for how they meet their costs. They can only use cash to pay their fair share under the state funding mechanism as well, which is dictated by the governor. And partners are also capped by law and how much they can contribute, further restricting the amount of money available to operate those comprehensive one-stop centers as well. So these are all reasons the state funding mechanism is indeed a last resort. Okay, so some other highlights that are getting into the weeds here, but you will assuredly get into the weeds if you were involved in MOU negotiations at some point. So the way local areas allocate infrastructure costs or for operating the comprehensive one-stop centers is called the Allocation Methodology. And so the governor's guidelines say the preferred method is based on full-time equivalents or FTEs. So a required partner with 20 FTEs, for example, working in the one-stop center will pay a certain portion, and a required partner with 1 FTE will, of course, pay a lesser portion because they have less full-time equivalent. So, and when partners are counting their FTEs who provide services under WIOA, they count the FTEs who physically work in the one-stop center and the FTEs who provide services in the center via direct linkage technology, which we just went over earlier. So let's go through one more example here to make sure that we have a good understanding of what this concept is. So for example, if rehabilitation services had a staff member in Chicago answering Skype calls in, for example, Marion, Illinois. The rehab services partner in Marion would still count those Chicago-based services as providing services in the Marion Comprehensive One-Stop through direct linkage technology. So that affects the amount of cost allocated to that Title IV rehab services partner's proportionate share in the MOU. So that's just one example there. I also should note that other cost allocation methods are available under the local funding mechanism, though not encouraged, but not under the state mechanism. FTEs are the required cost allocation methodology in the state funding mechanism, again, showing that lack of flexibility in that state funding mechanism that's triggered when partners do not come to agreement. So we know that the governor's guidelines require all partners to commit a minimum of 0.25 FTE staff to provide services at the one-stop center through either, again, on-site staff, contractor staff, cross-trained staff, or off-site staff through direct linkage. So last year's Governor's Guidelines 3, and of course, as reiterated in this Governor's Guidelines Revision 4, it formalized a waiver process that says if all required partners and the local board chair agree that a partner can commit less than a 0.25 FTE in a local area, then the local board chair can submit a waiver request to the state. So this provision on the slide here emphasized, though, that process to emphasize that all required partners have to agree before the local board chair can request that waiver. Again, so all partners have to agree and the local board chair has to submit it. So there has to be full agreement before a waiver request can be submitted to the state to then be looked upon on a case-by-case basis. Okay, so now getting into the shared local system costs a little more as well. So these local service delivery costs, they're less defined than infrastructure costs to operate comprehensive one-stop centers. The purpose of these costs is, again, to promote integration and streamlining of service delivery throughout the local area. So local areas have more discretion about which costs they allocate out to partners and how the partners pay their share. Example would be local board functions and costs to promote integration, such as joint staff training, for example. Here are some other examples, and note that the list can include anything local partners agree upon as well, so this is not restrictive. Costs to support local board functions, such as board staff salaries, board meeting costs, strategic data gathering and analysis. And then also, again, costs to promote integration, such as joint training, business services, which is big, receptionists, and resource room material, which is also common as well. Okay, so now we come to a timeline for MOU negotiations in the one-stops, just to kind of put a frame and context around all these activities that are going on. So this is a reminder about the timelines for the negotiations going on right now that will continue through the spring. So as far as what's already been accomplished, state legal and fiscal staff, they have identified any provisions to add to the MOU template, and that's been taken care of. The MOU template's been finalized. You see activity for December as well. Information is being gathered, and updated forms are being made sure to be provided as soon as possible. The pre-program your planning forms, they're due on December 31st, or if you're in the office, January 1st of each calendar year in December. The three red arrows, as you see, they indicate the three deadlines for your local areas to submit information to the state. So you see there in January, the pre-program your planning forms, they're due, and the negotiations have started. Then they go through April 15th, where negotiations end. The report of outcomes is then due, and also the draft one-stop operating budgets. And then you see there on June 30th, when those final MOUs and budgets are due to the state, and areas of impasse are reported to applicable federal agencies. Okay. So I also want to mention that the governor's guidelines, they lay out the process and timelines for negotiations, which is what I just went through right there. So I want to touch on as well, the MOUs are negotiated at least every 3 years. Local areas have 105 days to negotiate them in the years that they have to do their MOUs. And again, they have to submit a report about the outcome on April 15th. And again, if they can't reach agreement yet at the end of those 105 days, then they are subject to state-level remediation, which lasts 30 days, in hopes of avoiding an impasse. And again, all this information is included in the governor's guidelines, which we'll be providing a link to at the end of this presentation as well. I just want to, again, go over what the timeline is and then important dates as well. I do want to mention that impasse is declared only after the 30-day remediation period has completed with no resolution. If agreement is not reached during the remediation period, then the undesirable state infrastructure funding mechanism again kicks in, and the lack of agreement must be reported federally as well. Again, the share costs are negotiated annually, so each year local areas go through the budget negotiation process for the program year. I should also mention that final rules, they require local areas to periodically reconcile what they allocated to partners in the budget and what the costs actually were. Again, so I know there's a lot of dates here, but just know that this is the outline for the negotiation process. And again, please feel free to reference this as needed. And this outline is included in more detail in the governor's guidelines. Okay, so now we have reviewed the WIOA system and how it's operationalized in Illinois. I do want to review the certification process for one-stop centers as well before we get into other more specific topics, and I send you away with some links and resources too. Okay, so WIOA requires that the State Workforce Board, or the IWIB in Illinois, establish criteria for local boards to certify their comprehensive one-stop centers. So to be clear, it is the local board's responsibility in every local area to complete the certification process using the criteria and process established by that state board. And to review, each area has to have one comprehensive one-stop center, remember, where all career services are made available in that location. So the entire purpose of certifying the comprehensive one-stop center is to ensure quality and consistency of the services, again, so that every customer has the same quality of services, whether they are in Chicago or Quincy or Marion, wherever they are in the state. So the law spells out what the criteria for certification must cover. You can see the left side of your screen there. They must cover effectiveness, physical and programmatic accessibility, and then also continuous improvement. So if you want to view more information on the one-stop certification process, we won't go into all the details here today in this orientation, but you can follow the link in this slide. Steps of certification, who was involved in the process, past key outcomes, and what we have learned since this process was instituted back in 2017. They're all included in a presentation given at last year's WIOA Summit that you can find there by using that link. But the big deal about certification is that only certified comprehensive one-stop centers can receive state infrastructure funding if the partners reach an impasse on how they will share infrastructure costs and that state funding mechanism is triggered. So please note that this applies to designated affiliate sites and designated specialized centers as well. If a service site goes through the certification process and is approved, becoming designated, only then can they receive state funding. So if a local area does not certify its service site, such as a comprehensive one-stop center, and they fail to agree, they don't get that state infrastructure funding. It's important to remember. Again, it is the local board's responsibility to complete the certification following the state board's certification criteria and process. Local boards, again, they certify their comprehensive one-stop centers at least every 3 years, but not without first reviewing their certification criteria at least every 2 years as part of the routine process of updating their local plans. So again, this is just to give you a flavor of what the certification timeline is and how certification works in the state. Okay, so now that we've gone through certification, I do want to go over regional and local planning that was mentioned at the beginning of the orientation, and to look at the submission and state review of these local and regional plans, and also the MOUs as well. Okay, so remember, the local plan, that serves as a 4-year action plan to develop, align, and integrate the region and local areas' job-driven workforce development. A regional plan is essentially required to meet the purpose of developing, aligning, and integrating service delivery strategies. supporting the state's vision and goals, and coordinating resources among multiple local areas that are housed within those regions, as we looked at that map earlier illustrated. So to guide the development of those regional and local plans, the state has developed and made available a planning guide. So the regional and local planning guide, that provides very specific instructions and timelines for the public comment period and the submittal of regional plans and local plans. So regions and local areas have to follow this guide page by page, dot point by dot point, to ensure they meet the requirements for those plans. Chapters 1 through 3, that's the regional plan requirements, while chapters 4 through 6 house the local plan requirements. So there are 6 chapters of requirements that local areas and regions have to respond to in total. The technical assistance team, the interagency technical assistance team that we mentioned earlier, and the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board Executive Committee, they developed a state-level review process for all regional plans, local plans, and MOUs. They essentially used the planning guide as a checkpoint for whether the plans meet all requirements from a compliance standpoint. So this planning guide was just updated in October of 2019 for use in PY20, local and regional planning, that is already very much underway, as I'm sure you are aware. A group of state-level partner representatives, they're going to be reviewing the 54 documents, which we have 22 local plans because there's 22 local areas, 22 MOUs because there's 22 local areas, and then you have those 10 economic development regions plans as well. So that's 54 documents total that are going to be reviewed through a pretty labor-intensive review process. So that process, that's going to result in a report for every regional plan, local plan, and MOU. So that report lists whether the regions or local areas had to make any changes for compliance purposes, or just to improve their plans and MOUs so they better align with WIOA principles and the State Unified Plan. Those reports are issued around June 30th for regional and local plans, and then also September 30th for MOUs, just to keep those 2 important dates in mind. Again, June 30th for regional and local plans and September 30th for MOUs. So as far as duration of these plans and MOUs, the plans are good for 4 years through 2024. As far as MOUs, all 22 local areas are negotiating their MOUs to be effective at July 1. Then those MOUs will be good for 3 years through 2023. So 4 years for local and regional plans, 3 years for MOUs. MOUs will be modified each year to reflect changes to the annual MOU one-stop operating budget, which serves, again, as that contract between required parties in the local area. So those MOU budgets are negotiated each year, even though the MOUs themselves are have 3-year intervals. So I won't go through all of these here, but these are some common themes to MOU required revisions, because again, those MOUs are due June 30th, but then they are reviewed and go through a review process for weeks. So where we see the most often certain issues with MOUs, you can see here on the screen, that must be dealt with for compliance with WIOA statute. So for example, in the visions for the system section, as you see there at the top left-hand corner, there must be included a description of the vision for the one-stop system as it's currently being implemented, and how aspects of the vision are planned to be implemented in the future. So that's one example of a spot where maybe we get some incomplete information in the past, although it has been improving. The MOU has to describe the functions and scope of work of the one-stop operator as well. Local areas have to be specific and describe the one-stop operator's role, particularly when it comes to referrals between local partners. So essentially what I'm trying to convey here through those examples is just that it's important to follow each of the dot points of the required content in the MOU template, just like it is for the regional local planning through the local planning guide. So each aspect has to be covered to ensure state and federal compliance. Okay, so here are some tips to keep in mind as you navigate these processes over time for submitting these documents to the state. So one, you want to respond to each item of required content, as I mentioned. You want to review the final rule citations provided in the final reports that will be provided to you, specifically address that required content. provide sufficient detail, demonstrate each required partner's commitment to integration. In current and future activities, provide examples where prompted. And if specifics are not yet available, describe why. Include as much detail as possible about planned activities with projected timetables for each required partner's next steps, for example. So those are just some tips for revising those plans and MOUs. Okay, so now the final section to finish up here, I want to touch on service integration and the new concepts and work going on in Illinois. So as you may have noticed, we have been touching on the concept of service integration today, and WIOA implementation in Illinois has been laser focused on this concept. Service integration in Illinois is defined as a combination of strategies to align and simplify access to the one-stop center services, and also supports for employers, job seekers, and system customers, again, with the goal of providing the best experience possible. So the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board, or the IWIB, they've been making this a focus as it sets the priorities of WIOA implementation at the local level, because Illinois has many departments and programs involved in service delivery. Integrating these many resources is essential for customers to have a positive experience. So the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board, they've adopted a service integration policy and self-assessment process to help local workforce areas establish a baseline and measure progress along a continuum of integration. So I'll touch on that a little bit here. So starting in 2019, a service integration self-assessment was instituted to shape local action plans for improvement at the local level in regard to integrating services, case management, and resources. So for example, in the self-assessment tool that each partner receives, local partners, they indicate where on the spectrum of service integration they are in regard to different goals that are laid out for service integration. For example, adequate customer input being used to design and deliver services. So they might choose that there is some communication going on with partners on this front, or they might select that this is only occurring in isolation, but they'll indicate what level of integration that they're currently at. I should also mention that information on service integration must be incorporated into local and regional plans as well, just to show, again, that service integration really is a part of MOUs, local and regional plans, and also these action plans as well. So you can see the link on the slide here. You can use that to gain access to more service integration information. We have a whole page on the WIOA implementation portal on workNet. There's also forms, this form here, this self-assessment guide if you need it, and then also guidance and other resources as well, and it is consistently updated. Okay, so speaking of links to resources, here are some other resources you'll need to refer to, and you can download as you enter WIOA activities such as MOU negotiations and regional and local planning. But first here, so if you remember, I mentioned the State Interagency Technical Assistance Team. So this team, they provide technical assistance to required partners and local areas, again, to operationalize policy and guidance and to resolve those local implementation issues. So it's composed of individuals designated by the Interagency Leadership Team, which is another team I mentioned there at the beginning when I showed you that chart there of all the WIOA players. Excuse me. And they're designated by the Interagency Leadership Team of all required partner programs under WIOA. Excuse me. But I want to touch on what the role of the Technical Assistance Team is in the state briefly to understand how they provide assistance and guidance. So the Interagency Technical Assistance Team, they collaborate to solve local implementation problems that are interagency in nature. Another example would be review and process regional local plans and MOUs and budgets, as we talked about, and then also their modifications. Composing state-level remediation teams when local negotiations are at risk of impasse. They might intervene through providing support to the local level. And then also identifying the need for and initiating, again, other technical assistance for regions and local areas. Okay, so also for your reference, the following individuals from that technical assistance team, they can be contacted for technical assistance specific to each required program partner. as well, and so this will be included in the PowerPoint PDF that you have access to. Okay, so here are those promised resource links. So the WIOA implementation portal has everything you need to complete all these WIOA activities that we discussed today. So you can use the latest version of templates and forms when starting an activity. And please make sure that you're visiting the WIOA portal before you start any activity to make sure that you're using the most recent form of these templates and other required documents, just to make sure that we're not using anything that has been updated recently. Also, let me know if you need help with setting up an account on workNet to access this WIOA portal if you're not familiar with it, especially, again, if you're new partners, staff, which I believe most of you on this webinar are. I'll give you my email address here in a minute, but you'll need an account and a password. So some of you already have an account. Others of you will have to create one, but we can deal with that on a case-by-case basis. So the portal, that is just to reiterate what it is, the WIOA implementation portal is basically the hub. We're going to be able to access the governor's guidelines, the planning guide, again, that service integration information. You can view the unified state plan of the state, all the information you'll need. There's also an integrated timeline that shows a high-level view of all WIOA activities and the entities carrying it out, and affecting these activities. By maintaining this timeline, we can continue to identify points of intersection and potential integration between different WIOA activities. And we can also keep aware of what other activities are going on too. There's also an e-policy manual where you can check back here as policies are issued by following that link. There's also an updated list of agency planning and negotiations contacts for PY2020 as well for those negotiations and planning. And again, this PowerPoint is going to be made available to all attendees today, and the recording is going to be uploaded for reference and new partner staff to watch as needed here on into the future. But this concludes our orientation, and this is a loaded question because you can't possibly comprehend the ins and outs of WIOA in 2 hours. But do you have any questions now, especially new partner staff